Gordon's work having to do with Jews and Navajos, which we'll be learning about tonight, is in addition to his regular work. It was in the 1980s that Gordon was struck by certain parallels in the history and concerns of Jews and Navajos. Subsequently, he acted to facilitate a series of Jewish-Navajo interactions. Among these are the Jewish-Navajo Dialogues of 2013-14 and an upcoming trip to Israel, whereby Navajo leaders in a variety of fields will meet with their Israeli counterparts to develop programs of mutual benefit. Clearly, Gordon has used his degree in anthropology in creative and original ways. We are fortunate to have him as our speaker tonight. I now turn the program over to him.
Well, thank you. Let me move this forward. I'll hit myself in the nose. I may actually not even need it except for the fact that it's being recorded. I've been accused of many things. Being too quiet has never been one of them. Well, I want to first of all thank Margery and HaMakom for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come to Santa Fe. It's especially a pleasure because it wasn't snowing yet, which is expected to. I would point out as a start that this, I don't know what you're expecting, but no sweat lodges, no spirit animal guides, none of that. Do not go there. And perhaps a little bit of personal history is in order first. How did I get here? Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, my family moved to Albuquerque in 1955, so we have lived here a long time. That's where I grew up. And I became an archaeologist. My dissertation was on the prehistoric economic change in the northern Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico, not very far from here. But in 1987, I was working with the All Indian Pueblo Council and a man named Herman Agoya, who was really a wonderful human being, on a voter registration drive in honor of Miguel Trujillo. People in New Mexico, unfortunately, don't know who he was, and I'll divert it a moment. The New Mexico State Constitution of 1912 denied Indians the right to vote. In 1948, Miguel Trujillo and the Laguna Pueblo attorney Felix Cohen sued the state of New Mexico and overturned that segment of the state constitution that denied Indians the right to vote. In any case, I had just given a talk to Pueblo governors about the need to register and vote and do all this good stuff. And while we're sitting around just relaxing, kicking back, for reasons that I can't remember anymore, a number of the governors began talking about missionaries, saying they don't respect you, they come at you all the time. And it occurred to me, I had heard that conversation before from Jews. And it occurred to me then to begin thinking about it, listening and talking. And over the years, I've listened and talked over Shabbat services in Denver with Navajo poet Rex Lee Jim, with Cherokee stomp dancers at the Stokes Smith Stomp Dance Grounds near Salis, Oklahoma at 2 in the morning. Oh, please. But perhaps the most memorable of these interactions took place in the airport in Frankfurt, Germany. One of the groups I work with is the Chinle Valley Singers, which is a traditional Navajo music and dance group. They've been overseas 12 times. We had just coming back from a tour of Latvia with the U.S. Embassy there. And when I can, I try to do Jewish things when I tour. And in Latvia, that mainly means visiting monuments to slaughter. And so I put my kippah on and we'd go. And so we're sitting around in the airport killing time, waiting for our flight back to the United States. And I'm talking to them and I said, you guys should come up with a Navajo word for Jew. Because they knew that I was Jewish. They'd been to Shabbat dinner at my home, all that. And so I got to give credit to a man named Dempsey Deswood. And he said, here's the phrase. It's Bichayaji B'neh, which is now the word I use. It means people who wear little hats. Bichayaji B'neh is the word that I encourage Navajos to use for Jews. And on the way back, we began talking, but you're on a long flight from Frankfurt, why not? talking about Jews and Navajos, what's it like to be a minority, to have our own history, our own ways, while living in the world that is all around us. And it has been a mutual encounter in many unexpected ways. For instance, several of the Chinle Valley singers have been to my home for Shabbat dinner. I make my own challah, and it's good. False modesty isn't going to get me anywhere here. And they love it. So when Linda Davis, who's really one of the core members of the Chinle Valley Singers, had a Kina Alda for her granddaughter. Kina Alda is the Navajo coming-of-age ceremony for, I think we'd say here, girls, little women. No, that's a novel. Sorry. Anyway, so they invited me to the Kina Alda for her daughter. I said, well, what do you want me to bring? Challah. So I brought a challah. They got the challah. I got a piece of sun cake. It was really quite mutual. So what's really the background here that Jews and Indians, I think, share? First of all, at the most general level, I really emphasize that Jews and Indians share a historic date and a percentage. The historic date is 1492. It was a bad year for Jews. It was a bad year for Native Americans. We share that. And the percentage that we share is 90%. What is 90%? A lot of population studies have indicated that after the coming of the Europeans, Native populations dropped as much as 90% due to famine, disease, and slavery. There's a wonderful new book that I recommend called The Other Slavery, which is about American Indian slavery. It's excellent. But 90% is a percentage that the Jews share. 90% of the Jews of Latvia were slaughtered. So we share this rather hideous percentage of 90% and this date of 1492. Both communities have in our own ways fought for the right to worship openly and freely and to survive as distinct peoples. People don't often realize it, but the United States had a Religious Crimes Act until 1934, which made certain Indian religions, the Sundance and potlatch in particular, illegal. Illegal like go to prison illegal. And there are still people alive who did. And religions, our religion, we've been in situations where Judaism has been denigrated and downplayed. For instance, in 1923, the person who was then Commissioner of Indian Affairs met with Pueblo governors in Santa Fe and told them their religion is like animals. Oh, really? And so we've also had some of those same experiences. Not exactly identical, I'm not saying that, and I don't intend to. But we've had that. We've been pushed to assimilate. Whether it means, not pushing it if you have to take off for high holidays, don't really push that. If it means changing your hair, or your nose, or your accent. And that's something that Native people have too. The goal of the Indian schools under Pratt for a long time was kill the savage and save the child. And people learned that their parents' ways were dirty, really savage, certainly not anything worth keeping. Your language was, well, frankly, primitive, and not in the same ways. But Jews have been under that kind of pressure too. Why do you Jews always have to fill in the blank? We've all heard that in one way or another. But at the same time, on a positive note, each community has concepts which are at the core of our community, words which in some ways encompass what we think and who we are. For Jews, some of these words are shalom, mitzvot, tzedek, tzedakah. In the Navajo community, a word that you hear a lot is ke, which means balance, but also includes a great deal more. Things like love, compassion, kindness, friendliness, generosity, and peace. So that even Navajos who don't speak Navajo will often talk about and how important that is. Just as we will talk about shalom, and shalom means a great deal more than peace. It means wholeness and has a lot of other connotations. So that's interesting. So we share common concepts at the core of our identity. We share common struggles for religious freedom and cultural survival. We share struggles for the revival of our languages. For instance, Rexley Jim, who was the Navajo Nation Vice President, is a fascinating man. He's a poet in Navajo, and I got him published in Ireland, which is interesting in its own way. But he wants to make Navajo a religion, a language of the 21st century, and right now he's trying to figure out a word for computer that is less than 3 sentences long. But when I talk to Jews about what he's doing, I tell Jews, he's the Navajo Ben Yehuda. And most people here hopefully know who Ben Yehuda was. He's the man who really revived Hebrew as a spoken language, that you could do more than pray in it. You can, frankly, sell drugs in it, discuss atom bombs, order dinner, all that. And that's when Navajos say how passionate they are about the language, and they're concerned that young people often aren't speaking it, that resonates with me as a Jew. And our Holy Lands, when I think it was Teddy Roosevelt put together Carson National Forest and sort of took away Taos Blue Lake and made it part of that, oops. And it took Taos almost 70 years to get it back. Frankly, for me, it's the only nice thing that Richard Nixon ever did was he gave Blue Lake back to Taos. That kind of thing. Or when areas that people consider sacred are violated or threatened. We have sacred lands too. When people talk, when Navajos in particular say that the holy people gave Navajos the Navakea, which is the land between the 4 sacred peaks. If you've ever been west of Albuquerque, you've seen the sacred mountain to the east, which is Mount Taylor, which for Navajos is Tzotzit, turquoise bead mountain. And regardless of our feelings about specific boundaries, and I'm not going to get into that, Jews have a strong belief that God gave us the Holy Land. And I'm not going to get into the politics, I don't particularly want to. But it's that same kind of feeling that when Navajos talk about the holy people and the 4 sacred mountains, and that's something that resonates with me. But I think perhaps a really good way to talk about listening, and remember, the subtitle of this thing is listening to each other. I'm just going to read from 2 voices. One is a Jewish voice and one is a Navajo voice. I'll start with the Jewish voice. By the rivers of Babylon, we sit down and weep when we remember Zion. On the poplars in her midst, we hang our harps, for there our captors ask us to compose songs. Those who mock us demand that we be happy, saying, "Sing for us a song about Zion." How can we sing a song to the Lord in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand be crippled. May my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you and do not give Jerusalem priority over whatever gives me the most joy. That's us from Psalm 137. And here's another voice. As a bit of background, in 1864 to about 1868, the Nene people were exiled from their land by the United States government in the Long Walk, and interned in incredibly bitter and bleak surroundings at Fort Sumner, where about a third of them died. In the spring of 1868, General William Sherman came to Fort Sumner, and he sat down to negotiate a treaty with the Navajo chief Barboncito and other Navajo leaders. And fortunately for us, it was recorded through translation for the Navajo case by General Sherman's staff. And Barboncito is recorded as saying, I hope you will not ask me to go to any other country except my own. And then Sherman noted that outside the council, women clutched his coat and with tears in their eyes begged him to send them home. And he was visibly moved. And here is a little bit of what Bronitsky said, again, in translation. When the Diné were first created, 4 mountains and 4 rivers were pointed out to us, inside of which we should live. That was to be our country, and was given to us by the first woman of the Diné tribe. It was told to us by our forefathers that we were never to move out of the Rio Grande, never move east of the Rio Grande, rather, or west of the San Juan rivers. And I think that our coming here has been the cause of so much death among us and our animals. When one of our big men dies, the cries of the women cause the tears to roll down to my mustache. I think then of my own country. If we're taken back there, to our own country, we will call you father and mother. If you should only tie a goat there, we would all live off it, all of the same opinion. I am speaking for the whole tribe, for their animals, from the horse to the dog, also the unborn. It appears to me that the general commands the whole thing is a God. I hope, therefore, he will do all he can for my people, and I wish you to tell me, when are you going to take us to our own country? And that was Bronitsky. Now, what about Jews? What are we doing? Well, at the national level, I think I can safely say the Jewish organizations traditionally have not reached out to American Indians very often, and then it's usually only when there's a film like Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves got national Jewish organizations. They were trendy. Now, for better or worse, Indians are not trendy, and I'm not going to wait for them to come along again to be trendy before I do anything. Because in New Mexico in particular, for a lot of reasons, Jews in New Mexico have a long, long history of outreach and interaction and dialogue as businessmen, as lawyers, and more, just to name a few names. Solomon Bebo, who became the Jewish governor of Acoma Pueblo, the only non-Indian ever to serve as official leader of an Indian tribe in the United States. Toby Grossman, who helped found the American Indian Law Program at UNM, and who is still greatly missed by everyone who knew her. Tony Isaacs in Taos, who founded Indian House Records, the first Native American recording company to record Native music live. Felix Cohen, who was not only just Laguna's lawyer, but wrote the Federal Handbook of American Indian Law. Avram Organic, who was a doctor in Shiprock, and met and married Ida Mae Bradley, who was one of the first Miss Navajos. Should you ever go to Window Rock and go to the Tribal Museum, there's a wall of Miss Navajos, and there she is, 1954. Ida Mae Bradley, Organic. So these are just some, and there are others, and I'm not going to go into a lot of names, but in the conversations that I have, and the conversations that many of the people I know have had, the same questions come up. How have Jews survived? Do Jews regard the land of Israel the way that Native Americans and Navajos in particular regard their sacred lands? How was Hebrew revived? Could it be relevant to helping native languages flourish again? And I think that all of us here in New Mexico live in a unique time and space for outreach and interaction with Native Americans. This situation is unique. Well, it doesn't apply, for instance, to Phoenix or Tucson or Dallas or Seattle. But here in New Mexico, where there are, for instance, Pueblo feast days open to the public, where there are arts and crafts, which give you the chance to do something, to have your picture taken, or sometimes even to develop an ongoing relationship with a particular artist. And, you know, sometimes I think we sort of look down on that. But it helps to realize how powerful it was that people bought Indian arts and crafts, because, you know, the Harvey tours of the 1880s, 1890s began introducing a lot of people from the East to tours of Indian country, go to a pueblo, buy jewelry, buy pottery, buy something, which meant that by probably 1900, 1910, many homes in the eastern United States had some pottery or a rug or jewelry or something, or had been on one of these tours. And what that meant was that when Indians, particularly in New Mexico, came under threat, largely as a result of a Supreme Court decision in the 1880s, which said that Pueblo Indians weren't federal Indians because they didn't exist in a treaty status. They exist in a land-grant status. They weren't real Indians, and they were taken out of trust, which meant that Pueblo lands were almost overwhelmed. Right here, for those of you who've ever been to Tesuque, not New Tesuque, Tesuque Pueblo, for instance, it was so grim that in 1912, the Tesuque Pueblo Tribal Council barricaded themselves in their office, and they said that they would die before they gave up their land. But by this time, again, all these people back east had become, in a sense, at least Pueblo sympathizers or Navajo sympathizers. And so that when the Women's Clubs of America, which is one of the groups that really fought that, started working, they found they had a lot of white people who were sympathetic and understanding. Allies, for instance, that Indians in the Northwest didn't have, Indians in the Plains didn't have those kinds of sympathizers, and it meant that a lot of these problems, a lot of these difficulties were resolved with the result of white people who'd gone and bought some jewelry and have a pot of beer and all that. So, and a lot of that was managed or intermediated often by Jews. We don't have to go into the details here. But it did mean that in New Mexico in particular, the situation was sufficiently different, even then in Arizona, or God forbid in Texas, we won't go there. I can't resist, there's an old joke. Poor New Mexico, so far from God, so close to Texas. But we're not going to go there, I promise. And as a result of this, of thinking and listening, I facilitated a fair number of programs and dialogues, and I just want to talk about them briefly, because what I really want to do is for you to start thinking about the people you know. I would imagine most people in here have met an Indian or been to a dance or bought a pot or something. Not everyone perhaps, but a lot of people have. So that, for instance, when I first moved back in 2003, fairly soon, I organized a poetry reading as a benefit for Hadassah and the Albuquerque Indian Center, which was called Sacred Land, Holy Land. Jewish and American Indian poets read from their work in English, Hebrew, and Navajo. And it was a good fundraiser. Oddly enough, the hard part was finding somebody in Albuquerque who was writing poetry in Hebrew. I knew people who wrote in Navajo. And for a period of time, every Jewish party I'd go to, I'd say, you know anybody who's writing Hebrew? Finally, this woman said, I do. And that was a good thing. I'm the Congregation Albert Brotherhood Program Chair. And one of the projects I'm quite proud of is that this next month, we will have the 4th annual Jemez Pueblo Arts and Crafts Fair at Congregation Albert. I was, this last Saturday, somewhat to my surprise, I became the first Jew ever invited to give a prayer at the Navajo Nation President Prayer Breakfast in Shiprock, which was otherwise very, very evangelical. But I also spent 4 years studying Baptists in West Texas. And should you ever need a sermon on the evils of infant baptism, you call me, because I know it's evil. That's what Baptists say. All this sort of madness. As program chair, we've also brought, for instance, Navajo Nation President Ben Shelley to speak. We brought a previous governor of Acoma Pueblo to talk about Solomon Bebo, whose son he knew. And May 19th, we're going to have Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez speak at the monthly Congregation Albert Brotherhood Brunch. The Green Team at Congregation Albert, which deals with environmental issues, and I have invited Kevin Madalena to speak. He's a geologist. He's at the forefront of dealing with bears' ears. He's an enrolled member at Pueblo. He's going to be speaking. As Margery mentioned several years ago, we had a Jewish Navajo dialogue, and I have to give credit here to the rabbi at Congregation Albert, Harry Rosenfeld, who I think is the best rabbi I've ever known, and at 69, that's a fair basis of comparison there. Because he said, basically, whatever you want, if you want to make it happen, go for it. Don't have to ask permission, go to the board, none of that. Don't have to do that. So I knew a Navajo medicine man named Johnson Dennison, who was also an MA in psychology from Arizona State. So over the course of really 2 years, we had 3 discussions, 2 in Albuquerque, 1 in Window Rock. The first, which is fascinating. The first one was living in 2 worlds. How do we keep our balance? Dealing with the issue that many of us face. I think many of us in this community face it at high holidays. When you have to take time off, or should I take time, can I really afford to take time off for, okay, Rosh Hashanah, should I take time off for Yom Kippur? And Native people go through these things too. The second one was what makes land sacred? And we talked, what makes land sacred for Jews? Why is Israel the Holy Land and not, for instance, Newark, New Jersey? Oh, not going there. What makes the Turquoise Bead Mountain sacred? Why? And the third one, which was actually suggested by Johnson Dennison, and I have to give him credit, was healing the wounds of history, the Long Walk and the Holocaust. In other words, for both communities, these are tragic events that shaped our communities. How do we deal with that? Is it something we should get over? Get over the Holocaust. Get over Long Walk. It's a long time ago. Why are you still talking about that? And it turned out to be really wonderful. And it really was exciting because I told both of them, when we do it in Albuquerque, Johnson Dennison would be exotic and people would ask him most of the questions, and they did. In Window Rock, Rabbi Rosenfeld was exotic, and people asked him most of the questions. That was great fun. And we have other things. We are organizing a Navajo Nation mission to Israel in June next year. We've just been doing it for about a month. We have the proposal, we have the itinerary, we have a list of people that I would like to go. I'm working with Rabbi Paul Citron and with the Jewish Federation of New Mexico, which just today graciously funded the first good faith down payment so that the travel agents can start booking hotels. Very, very good. And it's going to be exciting because what we're trying to do is focus on sort of 3 areas. The most important one is business and economic development. In particular, 2 books have been really influential in my thinking, and I'm going to really see if I can get a reading list for the people before they go. One is Startup Nation, which is about entrepreneurship in Israel. The other is Let There Be Water, which is about water management in Israel. And that's something that many of us share in common. Desert. You're not at Mar-a-Lago here, gang, which is probably just as well. But this is a desert. How do we deal with it? How does Israel deal with it? So part of it is going to be to try and bring Navajo companies, Navajo Nation officials, together with Israeli companies to develop partnerships. And I'm being really careful about how I speak. And I hope you notice it. Nowhere in this have I used phrases like help the Navajos, which is a phrase I personally loathe, but to bring them together on the basis of shared interests and shared concerns and shared business opportunities. A second portion will be cultural, the revival of Hebrew, and what's it like to live in a Jewish space. One of the things, for instance, that I find often is that American Indian events, whether it's a Pueblo dance or a powwow or a shoe game, which I've also been to, those are Indian spaces, Navajo spaces, or general Indian spaces, created by Native people who run it, who control that space, and people are welcome or we wouldn't be there. But that's also the way that I feel, for instance, at Yom Kippur or Passover. These are Jewish spaces. We define the terms, we set them up. Obviously, they're different from Jew to Jew, but they're ours. And so that's another thing that I often feel that we have in common, is the importance of creating our own spaces at particular times in a world that is not us. Most of the people in this world are not Jews. Most of the people in this world are not Navajo. So that's part of it. And the third aspect of this mission will be a more religious one, particularly for Navajos who are Christian. The land of Israel as, of course, the Holy Land. And all of these things will be overlapping. It's not like separate tracks, but that's what we hope to do. And another project that we've just begun talking about within the last week, and it may not happen, possibility, underlying possibility, highlighting yellow in your notes, is a Native American Sukkot. Sukkot is the holiday in which, as hopefully you know, Jews at least eat in booths or brush arbors, and in which Jews traditionally welcome visitors. You know, that's, whether they're our forefathers and foremothers, which is part of it, and company. And one of the things that I've proposed, and again, I don't know if we're going to do it, is to somehow ask people at Congregation Albert, if you have enjoyed Pueblo hospitality at a feast day, and you know people, invite them to this. And whether we'll do it as individuals, we're also perhaps considering the possibility of just inviting Jemez Pueblo, where we've had this relationship now for over 3 years. To see what it's like. If those of you who are familiar with Sukkot, you shake the lulav in the directions. Well, gee, that's not going to be real strange for a lot of people that I know in the Pueblo world or the Navajo world. So we're going to try that. And what I would encourage you all to do is to begin reaching out. I would like to recommend a book. I used to be an academic, have not been in one for many years, but there's one book that I really would like to recommend to anyone who wants to take this seriously. It's a book called In the Beginning, and it's by a man named Gerald, J-E-R-O-L-D, Levy. Let me explain why I think it's an essential book. Gerald Levy was a Jew, he was an anthropologist, and he was a student of the Navajo. He wrote a very famous book on Indian drinking called Indian Drinking, Navajo Practice and Anglo Theories, which is still a superb book. But as his last work before he died, he wrote In the Beginning. And what it is, it's a look at the Jewish creation story and the Navajo creation story in the sense of what questions do they pose? How do they answer them? Questions like, why do people speak different languages? Why are some people evil? What does evil mean? How did that come about? And it's a very serious book. It's superb. If you have trouble, the first 2 chapters and the last chapter are worth reading. And if you can get through the rest of it, you should. So I recommend that a lot. So I want to, first of all, close, before I open it for questions, with a wonderful Navajo phrase, which is simply, Adil Nich, which means, let's do it. And I finally want to close with a saying from the Talmud, from Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers. Ben Zoma says, who is the wise one? He who learns from all men, as it says in Psalms, I have acquired understanding from all my teachers. I have had the great good luck and the great fortune to learn from many teachers over the years in many different places. And I want to close by thanking some of the best teachers I've ever had. The Chinle Valley Singers and Elizabeth Davis, whose memory continues to be a blessing for everyone who knew her, and especially to Linda Davis and Elsie Deswood. And Toda Rabba. So with that, I'm going to, shut up as much as I can.